So, Mike, did you see anything fun on the internet this week?
Ben, I see fun stuff on the internet every week. That's what the internet is for, despite all the doom and gloom that we hear about. But I actually saw this really interesting, I guess kind of a classic blog post, I don't know, essay by someone named Terry Gaudier called The Boring Internet. And this spoke to my soul. The subtitle is "The Internet You Grew Up On Isn't Dying. A commercial veneer glued on top of it is." And it just does this wonderful going through like the original promise of an open internet where you could do what you wanted and there were all sorts of fun and interesting things is all still there. And it's maybe hidden behind sort of a commercial interface. It really resonates deeply with me in all sorts of interesting ways. And it was a really sort of joyful read on the internet.
Sounds great. Sounds like it made you smile. I would love to read that.
Absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes. What about you? Did you see anything fun on the internet this week?
Yeah, I mean, I can't claim to have read anything quite so long form and smart as that, but I was on Blue Sky and I saw a post from Orkney Library and Archive. Go follow if you don't already. Orkney as in...
I don't.
As in the Scottish island. And I'll describe it to you because it's got different parts to it. It's of a picture of 4 books stacked on top of each other, the spines showing to the kind of camera. And the books say, at the top, Gordon Brown. The second book says Texture. The third book says Lakes. And the fourth book says Suns. And the post says, you can always tell when the Stranglers have been in to return their books. Gordon Brown, Texture, Lake, Sun. In case people didn't get it, that is good.
Okay. That is, yes, that is, I mean, that is impressive.
That is good, right? Both the Orkney Library and Archive posting and my ability to find that and bring it to you. I think both impressive.
Yes. Both are wonderful.
I'm back, baby. Hello and welcome to Ctrl-Alt-Speech, the podcast where we make sense of the major debates and discussions shaping online speech, platform power, content moderation, and the future of the internet. It's May the 28th, 2026, and this week we're talking about the Pope's hot take on AI regulation, what Spotify are doing in terms of music rights and AI, and for our Patreon subscribers, what's going on with the oversight board. Ctrl-Alt-Speech is the brainchild/love child of Mike Masnick, founder and editor of Tech Dirt. That's Mike.
That's an interesting opening, Ben. All right. You are on fire this week. Okay.
And me, Ben Whitelaw, the founder and editor of Everything in Moderation. Welcome, everyone. As of today, you can support the podcast and get extended episodes, plus the chance to submit stories for us to cover by going to patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech. You can also reach our lovely, distinguished listeners, that's you guys, by sponsoring an episode of the podcast. If you're an organization or an institution that wants to do that, go to Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com or email us at podcast@Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Mike, I'm back in the chair, as you well know.
Yes.
But the platform prompt is dead. That was our new attempt at a cold opening. I suppose we won't know what listeners think until this has gone out. But how did it feel? How did it feel in your mouth?
I guess we'll find out. I like that. I sort of like the idea of us discussing something fun that we found on the internet in the past week. And just a good reminder that the internet is fun and that there is a lot of really fun things out there. We all sort of default to this idea that these days that the internet is terrible and a problem. And it would be nice to remind ourselves sometimes that there is really good and fun stuff. And we enjoy the internet for good and fun reasons. So I liked it, but we'll see what this is an experimental phase of the Ctrl-Alt-Speech podcast.
Yeah. I agree. Although finding something good on the internet every single week might take as much time as the platform prompt took us, to be honest. Which also, like, people hated. Yeah, it turns out no one liked the platform prompt.
I don't know. I heard people who did like it. I don't know that anyone liked it to the point of like suggesting we should keep doing it. But I heard people who sort of enjoyed us struggling each week to come up with the platform prompt. So.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is likely to continue in this new experimental phase. So those listeners will be happy. I very much enjoyed listening to the episodes of the podcast while I was away. Thank you for making sure the podcast came out every week. It was a really good listen. For listeners who didn't get a chance to hear Jess and Ari and Jennifer chat with Mike each week, very much recommend going back and checking those guys out. What was your favorite part of being in charge of good ship Ctrl-Alt-Speech?
It was fun. I mean, we had really good discussions. I think all three of the guests, obviously being experts in their fields and having really interesting thoughts and discussions. And so it's always fun to talk to other folks, but it's always nice. We started this podcast together. It's good when both of us are here. I enjoy getting to talk to you again and also not having to run things.
It's not nice, is it?
You sort of organize the show in a way that is, it's nice when you're around and I don't have to put as much brain power towards that.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad that you also took the toll on your mental health for a few weeks. But no, it's also great to be back. I had a great time away. I was traveling around the south of France with my now 1-year-old and my wife. And if any listeners want a cast iron 3-week trip itinerary for the south of France, get in touch. I think I've cracked it. So, but yeah,
nice.
It was great. It was great to listen to you and some really smart experts on the drive between idyllic French towns. So thank you for that. We also got a couple of reviews and ratings while I was away. And those ratings and reviews, as we always say, Mike, are really important for us to find new listeners and to kind of get the word out there about Ctrl-Alt-Speech. And I like this one from Nelson because it kind of speaks to exactly what we try and do every week. Nelson says, although this podcast does attract a lot of people who work directly in the tech moderation safety sector, it's still approachable for the laymen. There are topics I hope to see more people who use these platforms get invested and politically motivated around. The hosts are concise. Don't agree with that. To the point, without being robotic. Truly a wonderful job. Please keep up the hard work. Do you have a family member called Nelson by any chance that you paid?
I do not.
No. Okay.
It's a very nice review. We always appreciate the nice reviews. I mean, I guess in theory we appreciate the not as nice reviews, but we appreciate all reviews.
Yeah, I agree. Just one quick note. I didn't mention that I was going to talk about this, but one of the episodes towards the end before I went away, we talked a bit about suicide, and I made an error in terms of how I referred to suicide, which I wanted to kind of flag. I think it's important for us to be really clear about how we use words on the podcast, and I recognized it straight away that I used terminology that was outdated in terms of how we refer to suicide. So I just wanted to kind of flag that, it's important to kind of be accountable to that. And I'll be sure to be more careful with the language I use next time. So just to put that out there, I got a really nice email from a listener flagging that. And we had a great back and forth, and this stuff matters. So just wanted to put that out there. And then before we jump in, Mike, just a big thank you to all our new early Patreon supporters. We've seen an influx of folks who, for some reason, have given us their hard-earned cash without getting anything in return as yet.
Well, that changes today. The podcast is now in the new format where Patreon supporters will get the full episode with an additional story. This week will be about the new funding for the Meta Oversight Board and sort of our take on that. So if you do want to hear that and you haven't subscribed yet, please go to patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech. You'll see there's 2 different support levels in which you can support us and get access to a special RSS feed just for you. If you have supported us, please go, and if you go to the membership tab, I believe there's a way to get the RSS feed. We'll also have a post explaining how to do it for you. And if anyone has any trouble, get in touch. We'll help make sure that you get your full episode. If you have not decided to support us yet, you should.
Now's the time.
Now is the time. There are 2 different supporter levels. We had, over the last month since we announced it, we had made it clear that we have the basic supporter level and then the founder higher tier supporter level, which will also give you the ability to weigh in each week on stories you would like us to cover. And we had said that founder level was for a limited time and would be switching to a higher priced version. So if you want to be a founder, we had originally said that would end today. In discussions, we've decided to be nice and leave that open so that, someone could hear this first episode in this new format and decide if they want to be a founding member or not. It will go through the end of next week. Mm-hmm. So you have effectively one more week or so to get in at the founder pricing and lock that in after the price on that goes up. But we've been really excited. Lots of great people have signed up already, and we're excited to try out this new format and see how it works.
Yeah, definitely recommend that. The kind of money you save as a founding member will get you a bunch of coffees or get you a bunch of tokens on whatever AI system you choose, and might even, or you can put it to, as some of the stories in today's episode attest, campaigning against AI as it's becoming an increasingly divisive issue on the internet. But yeah, great opportunity to kind of get the founding membership, but an insider membership will still be available in the future. So big thanks to everyone who's already got in touch and supported the podcast. It really means a lot. So yeah, let's deliver on that promise, Mike. Let's get stuck into today's stories. And we couldn't really turn down the opportunity to talk about the Pope, talking about issues that we care about. Do you think Pope Leo is a Ctrl-Alt-Speech listener?
I would guess not, but he keeps surprising people. So you never know. I mean, there was the story a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you caught this while you were away, but I think it happened while you were away, about him calling his bank. He has a bank on the south side of Chicago because he likes to pay for stuff himself. And he tried to change the name on the bank account when he became the Pope. And the person on the phone said, well, you have to come in and do that in person. And he said, I can't do that for a variety of reasons. And they were like, well, I'm sorry, that's the policy. And he said, would it help if I told you I was Pope Leo? And the woman hung up on him, which is probably the right thing to do. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even sure I entirely approve of him trying to jump the line.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I do get it.
The sort of like, do you know who I am kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's a little
cheeky.
Yes, it is.
Well, that aside, he has made the headlines this week as a result of his 42,000-word open letter, his encyclical, really covering all manner of topics related to the kind of future of technology, artificial intelligence, and how we as a society deal with this kind of huge seismic technological change. We're going to dive into kind of various parts of it, Mike, because I think there's lots of different interesting elements. But I mean, the fact that Pope Leo in his first kind of encyclical calls out content moderators, talks about data labelers, mentions AI regulation in all of its forms, is that kind of surprising to you, or do you think it's the topic of the moment and that had to be addressed?
I do think it is obviously a really big topic. And I think he even sort of signaled a little bit that he was thinking about these issues when he chose his name as Pope Leo, as sort of a reference to the previous Pope Leo, who was Pope during the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and commented a lot on sort of the nature of the Industrial Revolution. So I think there were some warnings on that. There's also been some commentary about AI in the technology world. And so I don't think it was hugely surprising that this was coming, but it still obviously drew an awful lot of attention. And I was sort of wondering how much impact it would have. And I'm sort of interested in the fact that how much people are actually discussing it seriously, right? I think there's a world in which he says something that feels out of touch and not relevant to the moment that would get dismissed. Obviously not by everyone, but what's interesting to me is how seriously a lot of people seem to be taking it.
Right. Before we jump into the kind of impact and the reaction, do you want to just kind of summarize as best as you can, 42,000 words, what you think he said for people who may have missed it?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a little bit difficult to do that. One, because it's 42,000 words, right? So there's a lot in there. And second, because in sort of the nature of Pope speak, it's not that direct in certain ways. And in fact, in such a way that different people can pull out different pieces of it and sort of talk about, this speaks to me, and ignore the parts that doesn't when you have something that long. But, the things that people are talking about is that it talks about the importance of humanity as opposed to sort of technologically driven intelligence, and sort of distinguishing between the two, and sort of pushing back on the idea of AI replacing humanity in some way, or the technology stepping up and replacing humanity. And, one of the parts that I thought was particularly interesting was that it really discusses questions of morality and technology, which, not surprising. This is the Pope. You sort of expect him to talk about morality in some sense or another, but sort of weighing in on what I think is kind of an ongoing debate, which certainly predates the AI part of it, about the morality of technology itself. And, there's this ongoing argument, and I've been a part of some of these debates about whether or not technology is good or bad or neutral in some form, or is it the users who are good or bad in some form. And the part that has stood out to a lot of people is what the Pope says is that it's not neutral, in part because of the people behind it who are making design choices. And those design choices flow through. And those choices, the decisions about what is promoted, what is enabled, how it works, how it's structured, those have a moral valence that come from the people who are making those decisions. And therefore, the sort of, to some extent, the morality of those people and the choices that they're making flow through to the technology itself. And you can't consider the technology itself to be purely neutral because it is being designed by companies that have power over it. And so it really then turns into a discussion of power and morality, which is fascinating and important to think about. I mean, a lot of what we discuss on this podcast is the nature of platform power and how that works. And, I'm not a moral theologian in any sense, right?
I thought you were going to say I'm not a moral guy.
Yeah, I am inherently immoral, Ben.
Yeah.
But, it's really interesting to think about where those things play together. I've been working on a longer piece, which should be coming out soon in a separate publication. I'm not going to pre-announce it now, that talks about decentralization, which is something that I'm obviously very, very focused on. And it was funny to me because I kind of made a similar point in this particular piece on the question of neutrality of technology, and saying that it's not that the technology is neutral, and it's not that the technology is good or the technology is bad, but the structure of it does matter. And the inherent choices that are made by the people who are putting together the technology matters. And part of what matters is, where is the power in the technology? Because if there is a sort of centralized point of control, then it becomes, and Pope Leo does sort of refer to Tolkien in the piece, like it becomes the one ring of power that everybody reaches for, whether it is the tech companies trying to gain more power for profit, or whether it is governments trying to gain more power for control over the populace, or whatever it might be. That element of it becomes very, very important, and understanding the structure is important. So I actually thought that part of the argument that he's making is that we need to think through these issues is really important and extraordinarily relevant.
Do you think people believe that technology is neutral still? Because I read that section. You think there is? Because I read that section. Yeah. I thought, much like the work you've been doing and the essay that you've written, I feel like that argument has been around for a long time. We're 3 decades plus into the internet. I feel like, particularly over the last 15 years plus, as large platforms have emerged, that idea that these platforms are neutral, that they are pipes that carry information, that don't have kind of rules or policies or guidelines that shape what's on them, has kind of been, I thought that argument had been won, really. Do you think that this is a restating of that view, or is he saying it to people who might not be as in the weeds as us?
I think that view, it still is very popular, especially in Silicon Valley, and especially among CEOs and developers, that the technology itself is neutral and the uses have any sort of moral valence. And so I do think that it is important. And I think that obviously there are lots of people who recognize that it's not true. But I actually think that the way that the Pope laid it out was very thoughtful. And I don't know if it's convincing or not. I mean, I was sort of predisposed to agree with it. But I do think he's sort of laying out an argument, which is nuanced, right? I mean, the worry with these kinds of things, and where I was sort of nervous about what he was going to say about it, was it's very easy to go, sort of a very extreme binary position. This is good, this is bad, or not. And this doesn't do it, and sort of lays out this sort of more nuanced path where it's saying there are humans and humanity, and they're making choices. But the underlying choices made by the powerful players in this space then impact the rest of those choices. And we should be thinking through the implications of that. And I think that is something that many people in Silicon Valley would prefer to ignore. And to that extent, I think there's tremendous value in laying it out this way and saying, yes, right? Like the technology can be used for good and bad things, but that doesn't make it neutral. It means that the choices that the people who are building the technology make really, really do matter. And that fits into some of the discussions in the AI space, specifically around alignment, which is sort of the big term that is important, but laying out more clearly this sort of view from the outside that plays into the discussion on alignment, I actually think is really important, getting the people who are building these technologies to think through the implications of what they're doing.
Yeah, I think, like you say, it would have been easy to call for a pause on AI development or AI innovation. And my reading of it, and I agree that some people may take a different reading of the passages and the way that it's laid out. But my sense is that he's calling for a slowing down of AI development to allow society to adapt, to catch up, and for us to kind of develop the ethics and the kind of oversight and the governance that I think a lot of people in this space think is needed. So that's a kind of difference from even just a couple of years ago when a lot of AI experts, including Elon Musk, including big names of some of the big platforms, were saying we need to stop completely what we're doing and wait for everyone to kind of catch up. I think that's clearly not going to be possible now, but there to
that was never possible. That was always sort of silly marketing, right?
Yes. I to be honest, I came up in the conference in London, the Trust and Safety Summit. I do think we have somewhat sleptwalked into, and again, this is maybe where the boosterism argument comes in. We've kind of sleptwalked into the idea that it's good for everything rather than being good for some things. And I think that what I liked about the encyclical was that it was a kind of case for a bit more critical thinking about where it fits, which I think is good. I also really like the part about hidden workers. He talked about the essential yet unseen activities that go into building frontier models and large language models. The fact that data labelers and model trainers and content moderators are often from the global south and are often women. And, we talked a lot about this as a theme, Mike, from everything from the big Sama case against Meta, the Kenyan moderators. We've had various guest hosts talking about this. And I was really appreciative of that detail and that specificity, really, which I think makes Pope Leo a very good potential guest host of Ctrl-Alt-Speech.
Yeah,
what do you
work
think?
On that.
You must know somebody that knows Pope Leo. I don't know. You're very well connected. Seriously though, like, do you on that part? Do you think we have kind of minimized the role of humans in the creation of this technology? Is that a part that do you think we need to keep coming back to on this podcast and in the coverage of AI?
I do think that this is sort of a big open question that a lot of people are sort of struggling with, which is, one of the challenging things about the technology is that it challenges some questions of what does it mean to be human? What is the uniqueness of humanity? And, there are elements that pre the LLM revolution, people would have said there are certain things that only humans can do that we're seeing. Some will argue that it's just sort of a parrot version of humanity, but it is certainly challenging some of the questions about what is and what is not human. And yet, I think it's good to have that discussion and sort of think through these elements of, what is the purpose of humanity, which is a sort of moral, philosophical discussion that some people are trying to have. And I'll note, it's sort of interesting to see that there was an Anthropic co-founder who was there with the Pope when this was released and had an address and sort of pointed out sort of an agreement of how they feel about this, which is in some ways surprising and in some ways not so surprising if you've seen sort of the way that Anthropic has positioned itself over the years. But it does feel different than previous technologies. And I actually think that difference is kind of important.
Yeah. I was struck by a little nugget in the Politico piece about the encyclical that we'll include in the show notes about how actually two of Pope Leo's kind of inner cadre, I guess, of priests, two experts on AI, have actually been involved in the creation of the Claude Constitution, which we talked about. So we won't have a lot of time to go into that, but there's a really interesting kind of probably separate conversation to be had about the links and the relationships between large platforms and tech companies and the papacy. Because to be honest, I thought that wouldn't be as these institutions wouldn't be so intertwined as they are.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that was interesting also, I think, in the political piece was the fact that like Silicon Valley was effectively lobbying the Pope for how this encyclical would come out, which is just all sorts of strange, like when you think about it. But clearly it's something that the Vatican has been thinking about. And I had mentioned to you right before we started recording that back in, I think it was in March, one of the Pope's AI advisors had come out with a piece talking about explicitly Peter Thiel and Palantir and the PayPal mafia and this idea of like transhumanism and just the push forward at all costs kind of mentality, and explaining why that was so problematic. And to some extent, I sort of see some of that as a preview for where the Pope was going with this particular encyclical. It was very interesting to see that intersection between the sort of tech world and I guess the Catholic world and how they view things, where in the past, I think the idea that the two would weigh in on each other would seem strange, but suddenly seems to make some amount of sense, which is in some ways surprising, but very interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. There is almost no one that some large platforms won't lobby, it seems, apart from us. Let's get to the impact kind of piece then, because I think there's a question about what impact will this have. There are 1.4-ish billion Catholics around the world. You could argue that this is a big maybe moment for them. This is a very well-read document in large corners of the world that follow the Pope's teachings. I was particularly interested in some of the coverage around J.D. Vance's reaction to the encyclical. He is a converted Catholic, so, and also Marco Rubio is apparently a Catholic as well. To what extent do you think this might change or sway particularly kind of both the public's and potential political figures' views on AI and where the direction that we're heading?
I don't think it will.
I kind of worried you might say that.
To make it really direct and like, J.D. Vance, it was interesting because he sort of said, I skimmed it and I found it profound, and then used it to sort of justify his existing positions. Like, rather than actually talking about what it talks about, he tries to turn it into talking about technology and warfare. And he says, we can use this to update the just war doctrine, which has been the argument that the Trump administration has been making to justify the attack on Iran, and where the Pope had effectively criticized the attack on Iran, and the various people in the Trump administration had pushed back, and we had this Donald Trump versus the Pope back and forth, which is crazy for a bunch of reasons. And so he's sort of trying to use it to his advantage. And as I said, like, when you have 42,000 words, people can pick and choose different pieces and talk about how it supports their viewpoint. I mean, that's what I just did in talking about it as well. So I don't think it's going to change anyone's minds in a way that will have that major impact. But I do think that maybe it will get some people on the margins to think through the consequences of what they're working on a little bit more. Not the people who are sort of dug in, but people actually making some of the decisions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we are running things a bit differently this week, as listeners know. Other big story this week is going to be about the Oversight Board, which we'll come on to. So we're going to go into what I'm newly dubbing, Mike, the eye-catching stories section. Because I think quick stories we're going to get referred to the Advertising Standards Agency, since they were never quick.
But like, look, time depends on what scale you're measuring them.
That's such an appropriate Mike Masnick view. I love that. So we have a couple of stories that we both found eye-catching and notable. So let's go into those, and then we'll dig into the Oversight Board. So the story I want to bring to listeners is about comments made by the Spotify CEO, who has defended kind of in quite strong terms the expansion of AI-generated music on the platform. He has done this on the back of a deal that Spotify have done with Universal Music that allows paid subscribers, and that is important, of Spotify to remix music by participating artists. And his rationale, which I think is interesting, is that a kind of controlled version of AI-generated music is better than, quotes, the illegal version of it, the kind of AI slop created aspect. And he talks about it being legal and controlled, which are, if you think about it, two words that basically sum up how the trust and safety industry has worked for decades. So there's clearly a kind of product justification here for allowing users to use AI-generated music and to create it. What I think is interesting is that it's a little bit of a change. I'm quite surprised because just a matter of months ago, 7 or 8 months ago, last year, Spotify came out and said that they were developing kind of stronger AI protections for artists, and they were going to enable artists to kind of go after people who are using their IP, their music, their voice to create AI-generated music. And it was kind of a big announcement just in September, October last year. And this is I think, a bit of a change of tack. It's AI-generated music for the purpose of generating profits for the platform. It's kind of like, it's an exception to the rule they created last year, is my view. And again, I've talked a bit about how I'm seeing the difference between seas versus reservoirs, platforms who think about AI as a content creation tool versus those who are very anti it. And I know you got experience of this from your tech dirt community, Mike, but I'd kind of thought that Spotify was going to be in the anti-AI generated music world, and it seems to be making an exception here.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting. It is sort of a more nuanced approach. I mean, I think the important part is that this is with artists who specifically opt in to allowing their works to be used in this way, which is a really important distinction from a lot of other services and the way that other things have worked. And, you know, it sort of takes me back to when the artists are in control and are doing this approvingly like that, it can be really powerful. And I think back to the example from a few years ago of Grimes, the singer who is also Elon Musk's ex, but that's a whole other story, where she explicitly licensed an AI version of her voice to anyone who wanted to make music with her voice, with a agreement that if you made any money from any songs that you created, that 50% of the profits went back to her. And I thought that was actually a really creative use of AI. And I sort of see this as the same thing, where it's like for artists who want to allow people to experiment and remix and create different versions of songs or covers of songs, that they can do so in a permissioned way, I actually think is really interesting. The other element that I thought was very interesting was one of the comments that was made by the CEO was that they wanted to avoid the kind of AI-driven experiences that make you feel good in the moment, but ultimately leave users feeling that they had wasted their time. And this struck me because like the Resident Computing Manifesto that we put out last year uses almost that exact language of the real thing that we're concerned about is how much people and technology companies were focused on building these experiences that sucked you in. But afterwards, when you had time to reflect, did you feel good about the time that you spent on that service? Or did you feel like, oh man, that was, you know, did you have a hangover, or do you feel like, oh, that was great, that was really fulfilling? And so it's interesting to see that language creeping in and companies beginning to think a little bit more thoughtfully rather than like just shove AI into everything. Rather, it's like, is there a thoughtful way in which we can add this in where everybody's approving of the way it is? It's not, we're going to force this on you, but in a way that actually feels more relevant and something that people enjoy rather than just sort of, you know, what was generally referred to as AI slop.
Yeah. And eagle-eared listeners might have heard just in the background, my son, who is being put to bed, having quite strong views about both bedtime and probably Spotify's use of AI-generated music. So if you caught that, that's what that was. Yeah, I think this Spotify is a platform that I'm constantly drawn to as stories come out about the mic. They've had a rough time at parts over the years when it comes to trust and safety, and this, I think it will be another interesting turn. Let's go to the kind of other eye-catching story that you found this week before we move on to our second big story.
Yeah, so this is about OpenAI has announced that they're getting ready for what they call cyber misinformation defenses, related to the upcoming midterm elections in the US, and I imagine elections elsewhere around the world as well. And they're putting in place a few different programs, one of which is that they're offering specific cybersecurity AI products to registered voting system manufacturers. So if you're an official maker of voting systems, they're allowing them to use their advanced tools for cybersecurity to, make sure that the systems are safe. But then they're also working with the various secretaries of state who run the different state elections to make sure that they understand the latest capabilities and that they can use the tools in a wise way. But then also, perhaps most interesting, is partnering with the Associated Press so that if anyone is asking ChatGPT for information about the elections, that they're getting information directly from the AP as opposed to just the AI sort of trying to figure out who to pay attention to. And this is interesting in a number of ways, in part because it's sort of like this recognition like, well, we should narrow in, especially at a time when you have foreign governments, Russia in particular, there have been many stories about it, figuring out how to poison AI systems so that if you search on certain things, it'll give you back, misleading results. But the thing that stood out to me, honestly, is a large tech company in 2026, publicly talking about their misinformation defenses.
Wild.
Which, we sort of saw in 2024 and 2025, the big tech companies just completely go silent on anything related to anything that says mis or disinformation, sort of recognizing that they were getting attacked for it. And, there's an entire segment of the population who has come to believe that any discussion or programs around mis or disinformation were purely censorship programs. And we still hear that today. And, this was a big theme of last year's TrustCon, where it's like a lot of people are kind of hiding and being quiet, because if you raise your head up and talk about your efforts on mis and disinformation, there is someone in the government who is going to attack you as wanting to censor people. And so to have OpenAI come out and just be like, this is our election misinformation program, it strikes me as really interesting.
Yeah, there's 5 people in the EU who've had their visas cancelled and their US stays revoked as a result of their work in the misinformation and disinformation space, right? So I was very surprised to see this too. It won't take a lot for a kind of Republican or MAGA style influencer to turn this announcement into part of the industrial censorship complex trope that we hear come out time and time again. So yeah, I think it's could be a red rag to a bull to those guys for OpenAI.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of in the lead up to the election, then post-election, depending on what happens in the midterms, whether or not there's any pushback on OpenAI for this. I'm hopeful that it's a sign that maybe we're getting past the nonsense from the last few years and that people realize that misinformation is a real issue, and that includes in the AI space, and OpenAI being willing to come out and use the term and talk about this directly is actually a sign of hopefully the tide turning on that point, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll be there to chart it each and every week. So if you are listening to the free edition of the podcast, we're going to leave it there for this week. In the extended version, also known as Ctrl-Alt-Speech Plus, if you like a kind of brand term, Mike and I are going to go deeper on a story that has literally just kind of come out in the last few hours. Big story by Casey Newton, a platformer on the oversight board receiving additional funding. We've got lots to say on the matter. We've covered the topic extensively. So yeah, looking forward to talking about that.
That's the end of this week's free edition of Ctrl-Alt-Speech. To hear the extended episode with additional coverage, become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/Ctrl-Alt-Speech. That's CTRL-Alt-Speech. If your organization is interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact us via our website at Ctrl-Alt-Speech.com. Thanks for listening.